My first time seeing Baba physically was 10 years after I'd been a Margi. I had the money to go quite a number of times, but every single time the project just sucked up that money, and I was really, really desperate to see Baba. So in 1984, Dada Jopasiddhananda arranged to meet Vivek and I and our two eldest kids, Mira and Balaram, in Bombay. And we did that, and the first thing we had to do besides deal with jet lag and culture clash and everything was to buy a sari, because we couldn't go in front of Baba without a sari. And so it was just very difficult to choose a sari from all these millions of things that we were offered. Anyway, I finally chose one, and we did some other necessary things, buying water bottles and that sort of thing. We flew off to Calcutta, and we got installed in the Lindsay guest house, and we stayed there, and it was time to go see Baba, and it was morning. So I was still dealing with jet lag and a lot of mental clash and confusion. I don't know where this confusion was coming from, or I just felt really awkward, and I didn't know what was going on, basically. So I went through the motions. Mira and I had to put on our saris, and it was awful. We had to use nappy pins to hold the things together, and we were tripping on them, and they were bulky, and they looked really very ugly, and we just felt so foolish. And we had to get in the taxi and go off and meet Dada at Baba's house, and there we were. And I'd seen pictures of Baba's house, so there we were, finally. Lake Gardens. And the gates were open because Baba's car was going to come out. And I walked in just thinking, well, here I am. And everybody seemed to know what was going on. But me, I didn't know anything about what was going on. But I thought, well, I tried to put a smile on my face as if I knew how to put one foot in front of the other when I really didn't, and still feeling very foolish and awkward. And Mira was just clinging to me, not knowing also what to expect or what was happening. And all of a sudden everybody started rushing and forming into these prearranged groups, and I realized that Baba was coming. And Mira and I wound up on the brother's side. I don't know whether he was going out on field walk or whether he was just coming for darshan. And actually, I don't even know. Oh, yes, it was morning. Anyway, I was on the brother's side with Mira, and the only tiny little scrap of space to sit in that was left was right beside the 44-gallon drum where everybody drank. So it was a mud bath underneath where everybody had dropped all this water, and so it was all squishy, and we had to sit down in these saris in this mud pie, basically. So I felt even more confused and more awkward and very stupid. And Baba came, and in my fantasy, in my dhyan, in my relationship with Baba, in my everything with Baba, I honestly thought he's going to just open his arms up, look straight at me and say, "You've come, finally you've come," and I would satisfy some hunger in him. But he came and sat down, and here we were in the mud and on the brother's side, and everybody was singing, and I was looking at Baba, and I was just completely clashed, utterly confused, and just dealing with that. And then Baba was gone. And then everybody got up and started chatting and talking about where they were going for lunch, and leaning all over Baba's car, and sort of just as if the place was familiar, and I felt like I was from another planet, and I had this mud sticking to my petticoat. I was trying to pull it away from my legs surreptitiously without anybody noticing. And then Janta said to Vivek, let's go to Nirmala's and we'll eat some dosa. And I thought, that's the living end. I can't go eat dosa with anybody anywhere. I'm going back to bed. I'm going to lie down and get rid of this jet lag. And so Vivek said, yeah, let's go. And Balaram said yes. And then Mira and I said, no, we'll go back to the hotel. So we went back to Lindsay Guest House. It was Krishna Priya, who is now Didi Nandakalika, and Mirabai and myself. And I lay down on the bed just completely devastated, but I didn't know why I was devastated. I couldn't understand what was happening to my emotions. And Krishna Priya, Didi Nandakalika, and Mirabai sat and just giggled and told girl stories on the floor. Instantly I fell asleep. Instantly. And as soon as I fell asleep, walking towards me was Baba. And I was standing there, and I put my head on one side, and I looked at him out of one eye, out of the corner of my eye, and I said, and I was doing namaskar, and I said, "Are you my Baba?" Only a bit stronger. It was, "Are you my Baba?" And simultaneously, not after I said that, but at exactly the same time, or a split second later, he kept coming towards me at a very fast pace, and he said, "How do you realize the self?" And I went, "What?" Here am I questioning him about who he is, because I want to get this straight, even though I thought I had a relationship with Baba, there was still something in my mind where I couldn't fit the two together. And then, so here I am, "Are you my Baba?" And he's doing, "How do you realize the self?" And it was like hurtling down a highway in a car, and all of a sudden I find I'm going in the opposite direction, and I don't know how I got in the opposite direction. Anyway, he flipped my whole world inside out, and I just was speechless, and there was nothing in my head, just a great big question mark. And then he came right up close to me. Actually, I don't think he even stopped walking the whole time. And then he made his fingers into a three-pronged, like a trishul, and he did a mudra into the side of my head 3 times, and he said, "You be sweet, you be sweet, you be sweet." And then he disappeared. And then I woke up, and I looked at Krishna Priya and Mira, and I said, "Oh, I've just had a Baba dream." And they were eating potato chips and playing with their colored bangles, and their faces were all shiny with oil from the potato chips, and they were giggling. And they looked at me and said, "Oh," and they just kept playing and giggling, and I thought, "Oh God, I can't relate to this at all." And I lay down and put my sari over my head and just cried. Just couldn't fit everything together. It was just all too much. And then I spent the rest of my whole time with Baba. I didn't know anything about Madhu Bhava then. I hadn't read anything about it. Well, I did. I knew about that before I was a Margi, but that was also sort of in the past. And so I didn't know what "you be sweet" meant. I thought it meant I was supposed to be smiling and nice, even though I was extremely clashed out. So I went through quite some days. That was also the time that Indira Gandhi was shot. So there was martial law, and there was a lot of dramas going on there. But slowly, I began to fit the two together, that, yes, this is my Baba. And when I did fit it together, I honestly don't know how many days it took. Maybe it was even only a couple more visits. But I remember looking at Baba and realizing he's shining from inside. It looks like a stage spotlight is on him. Where's this light coming from? And I'd look around. It was night, dead of night, but he was just shining with this light. And so little things like that happen where I'd think, oh, he's lit from within. And another time I saw him during that visit, and I completely emptied my mind of anything but my mantra. And then I felt my mind was like a cloud. It was a body of particles held together, and this cloud was moving up towards Baba and feeling all over him as if I was a blind person trying to sense, what is this entity? What is this? Who is he? And my mind just couldn't stop going over and over his form, just drinking it in and experiencing it. And the only thing my mind said that whole time was gate, gate, gate. And I realized he's the bridge, he's the gate. And then after that, Baba left and walked up his path. And I didn't care anything about who was there, who was looking, anything. I just completely stretched myself flat on the ground on his path where he'd walked and pressed my tongue to the dust where he'd been walking, and just lay with my face in the dust. I realized, this is my Baba. Finally, this is my Baba. I did that on his staircase too. After everybody had gone and they were stampeding all off, I lay on his stairs and I just stretched my arms out and I just licked the stairs. Just this complete, I don't know, I just couldn't make myself flat enough. You know, I didn't know how to express it. I didn't know how to, didn't know what to do.
Oh, God.
But it was such a confusing time and very tumultuous. I'll tell you my PC dream, and then you can understand why I was so, like, I honestly thought he'll just move everybody out of his way and just take me in his arms somehow. I just thought this instant bond would happen. I was so shocked when he hid behind this other plate. I was just devastated. I wanted to kill him, and I wanted to kill me. I was so angry, so hurt. Even though he came in that dream and he said this, it still wasn't what I wanted. I wanted to be in his arms. And I realized it was his Leela, and it was all very interesting. And after, when I used to go to India, and I realized that his physical body was actually just as a catalyst for our internal love. That's all it was. Yeah, this is my PC dream, and it sort of explains a little bit about why I was feeling what I was feeling when I first went to see him physically. I became a Margi in 1974 and was here at Anandapali in 74, and it was probably 80 or 81, I can't remember when exactly, but it was an extremely intense place with work pressure and a lot of drama and chaos, a lot of craziness, fires and floods and broken water pipes, and just one crisis after another. We were just like surfing on one wave of craziness to the next. And Dada Parananda came. He was the LFT trainer. And he, one day he was coming out of the ashram, and I was just running past doing something. By that time I had 4 children. And I was very busy trying to bring the kids up. Vivek was so busy trying to just keep the master unit surviving and from careering into disaster one minute to the next. And so I didn't have a lot of time with Dada, but I just mentioned something in passing to him, like, oh, well, when I'm in the room with Baba physically alone, I can tell him these things or something. And he laughed and he looked at me and said, oh, that's not going to happen to you. You're not going to go in the room alone with Baba. That doesn't happen. You're a sister. But never mind, you'll get him in dream. And then he went away, and I couldn't believe. I thought, my Baba wouldn't do this to me. This wouldn't happen. Not me and Baba. This would not happen. So I went home and I just was churning inside that, what do you mean I can't be alone with my Baba? But of course, sisters either went in groups or not at all. Anyway, I couldn't accept this. In my heart, I just still, days and days, maybe even weeks and months passed, I can't remember. I couldn't accept that. And in the dream, there was one sister sitting beside me. It was Priyadarshi. She had gone to be an acharya by that time. And there were just the 2 of us that I was aware of, but I knew that behind me there were other Margis and workers, but they didn't exist for me at all. You know how that happens when you're with Baba, but you're actually alone. Anyway, Baba was sitting on his cot, and we were not even inches away from the cot. We were pressed up against the cot, and Baba was sitting cross-legged. And he was looking at Priyadarshi, and he was talking about something, and it was something quite intellectual, and I could see out of the corner of my eye that Priyadarshi's face was working away. She was trying to understand what Baba was saying, and I remember sitting there just keeping my eyes wide open, keeping my breath going, and just drinking him in. I wasn't trying to understand anything. And I was thinking, oh, that's so foolish of her. She should just let it happen and not try to grasp on that level. And as I was thinking that, something gelled inside me that's my way. That's my way of relating to Baba. It won't be through my mind because I'm not intellectual and I don't understand a lot of what Baba talks about. But it just felt like, yes, this is my way, to just take him in. And within seconds after that, very shortly, Baba turned to Priyadarshi and did something that never happens, but it happened in my dream. He took her by the hand and he held her hand. And as soon as he did that, my breath just left my body, and I didn't feel jealous, like, I don't want her to have that, I want me to have that, give it to me instead. It was just, yes, that, me, that, yes. Just this sort of feeling was coming. And instantly, no time gap whatsoever, but at the same simultaneous time that desire surfaced in my mind, he began to change all of the planets in the whole universe. Everything had to rearrange itself so that he could turn towards me and fulfill one little tiny devotee's desire. To do that, all the atoms have to rearrange themselves, not just in his body, but when he moves his body, everything rearranges itself in the whole creation. And slowly, he began to turn towards me. And he didn't push her away. He was so gentle with her, but he turned and put her hand down, and slowly, to fulfill my desire. And then he put his hand on my arm, and he was still giving the talk, looking at me as well, and he just began to move his hand on my skin, and I thought, I'll die, I will faint, I will evaporate, I can't remain in this body and experience this also. It just can't happen. But it did. I was still conscious and still able to maintain living in this body, and his touch was so soft. And I think at that stage it was Baba's physical touch. I've had Baba's physical touch twice in my life. Once in Guru Puja and once in sadhana. But I think also in this dream, I had Sparshthan mantra. I could feel his physical touch as well. And this went on for a long time. It was like I was just drinking after zillions of lifetimes in desert. I was just drinking and drinking. And all of a sudden the whole vibration changed, and he just put my hand down and got up and jumped off the back of the cot and started to walk towards a door at the back of the room. Everybody jumped up and left in the group as well. And all I could think of was, oh no, you can't go, not now, no way, you're not going now. And I jumped up on his bed, on his cot, and I put my hands in namaskar, and I just was craving him, just this hunger that was eating every cell of my being. And slowly, in response to that, he turned around from the door and began to walk back towards me. And I thought that I loved Baba. I thought, I am loving Baba. But I had no idea how much he loves me or how much he loves us. he came towards me with his arms open, and this raw desire, just this, I will have her, I will get her, just this huge tidal wave of love, and I just became quite paralyzed. And my hands sort of fell down, and I was almost blasted backwards off the cot, just so overcome. And then I realized this is what Parampurush feels for his creation. The creation thinks that it feels attraction, but his attraction. Anyway, I was absolutely crisped, absolutely bowled over. He got on the bed, grabbed me into his arms, and just pulled me into his arms. And he was just looking at me, and I was hanging in his arms like I was a rag doll, just floppy. And he was looking at me, and he was whispering to himself and singing to himself, and he was touching all over my face, just crooning to himself and playing with me. And it was like I was just an object. I wasn't anything, but I was his object. And it went on and on. He just played and played and singing and touching and looking, just the way you look at a doll. You inspect the hair and the eyes and all of this. And then he took me by the head, and he just pressed me into his chest, just pressed me. And I was just hanging there. And I don't know where I went. I have no idea what happened. But I was still conscious, I think. But something happened. And I became aware of his rocking motion after a little while. And I realized he's Divine Mother. He has cared for me since I've been a little amoeba. And he cares for his creation also in that way, that he's just loving and caring all the time. And then we became two separate entities. He didn't push me away and I didn't pull away, but we just were two separate entities. And I just realized a lot of things. I don't know what they are, but just mostly that I had absolutely no power of anything. He allowed me the power of observation, and that's all, watching his game. And then I realized that when he pulled me into his chest, he was teaching me about Dhyan. At that time, my understanding of what Dhyan was. And I think that's all that happened before it changed. Oh no, still I was in such a state, almost just so fuzzy and so blissful. And I became aware that he was touching my head, but not physically touching, just slightly above my skull. He was moving his hand over and over in a circular motion. Then that circular motion became elliptical, oval. And all around my head, around my skull, was growing golden color. And I was told later that's Hiranyamaya kosha, the color of gold. And he was polishing my Hiranyamaya kosha. He was buffing and polishing very beautifully. And I could feel, the thing that I was enjoying was the golden light, yes, but also the diffuse feeling of the softness of his hand, so soft. And then I stopped being aware of the softness of his hand. I became aware that he was drawing all of his energy into one tiny atom in the palm of his hand, and it became like a diamond cutter for glass. He etched one last circle, one last oval in the top of my head, and then he lifted his hand up like that, like Varbhaya Mudra, and there was a tiny spider web of line of microvita, like a little thread that was holding the trap door of this oval, and he lifted it up when he moved his hand. And then I realized my liberation's completely in his hands, totally in his hands. And then that's when he drew himself up became very much Guru, almighty, and I was still in his arms, just gazing at his face, and it was very awesome. He was very regal and very all-powerful, omnipresent, omnipotent, and he said, "You will walk your path, regardless of the effect that this will have on anybody or anything in your environment. You will walk your path." And I was just trying with my mind to reach, what is this concept? Then he flipped the concept inside out and he said, "You will walk your path regardless of the effect that anybody or anything in the environment will have upon you. You will walk your path." And then he just got up and left. And I woke up. After my dream of being so loved by Baba, that's why I had such a big shock that Baba didn't push through everybody and run towards me the first time I went to India. When I was in labor with Mirabai, actually before that, all my life, I used to tell my mother, I want to be a mother and a nun. And my mother kept saying, "You can't do that. No, you can't do that." But now I realize that what I was saying was, I want the experience of childbirth and motherhood, but I want a spiritual life. And I didn't know what that was. But when I was in labor with Mirabai, it was 1970, April. And I was in a little cabin on a rocky beach on the shores of Vancouver Island, very, very isolated. And I had an Australian midwife. And I can remember her sitting in the candlelight sewing while I was lying in the bed in labor. And it was 18 hours. And I'd reached about 17 hours by that point, and it was a very ecstatic experience, which sounds really odd, but it was just so agonizing and so outrageous that without ideating and going up, there was no escape but up. So I did all the childbirth breathing, and I was doing the hummingbird breathing, where your breath is just fluttering in and out so fast at the height of a contraction that I would just disappear into this other sort of phase, and the waves on the beach were crashing, and these waves of contractions were coming, and I was realizing all these amazing things about cystosis and creation and so many things. Anyway, things were getting pretty intense, and the harder the contractions, the higher and the more pointed my mind became. I remember my mind was just a pinnacle, just a point, and I was just stretching and pushing and pushing and pushing to go as high as I possibly could to stay just above the crest of these waves. And I looked out the window, and there was a hummingbird at the window while I was doing the hummingbird breathing. And in the North American Indian culture, which I was really into at that time, the hummingbird is the spirit messenger. I remember looking at this, the spirit messenger, and the next contraction, I don't recall anything about it. All I recall is coming back. And the ecstasy and the bliss was so like nothing I've ever imagined possible. Anyway, I wanted to say a little bit about this because Mira comes into the next story. It was 1986, and it was almost Ananda Purnima, and the message came all through the sector that Baba was calling everybody who was a Bhukti Pradhan to go for PC. And I thought, yes, I have to go. I was actually very scared because after my personal contact dream, years before, I became very, very ill, nearly lost my life, which is a lot of samskaras ripening. I got myocarditis, which is a heart swelling of the heart and inflammation of the heart muscle. So I called the office. Dada Parananda was there at that time, and Dada Jayashivananda. And I said, would you please both discuss with yourself? You both know me. You know my everything. You discuss with yourself and call me back in 10 minutes. If I go to see Baba, and it's May, will I survive? Should I go? So I sat by the phone for that 10 minutes, waiting and waiting, and they called back and they said, go. Even if you die, go. So I went. But before that, I had several weeks of preparation and visas and passports and ridiculous dramas with the Indian embassy and stuff. And in the midst of it all, every night I would have this dream that I was being put into a furnace. It was like I was facing my worst fear of how am I going to handle the heat? How am I going to cope with India in May? It'll kill me. And so I was facing night after night, these dreams would come that I was being put in blast furnaces and things. And finally when I went, I found myself actually able to run up 5-6 flights of stairs, and I had no problem whatsoever. So that was one very nice aspect of that visit. The other one was that Baba actually did not give personal contact to the Bhukti Pradhans. So many different things, his health and this and that. And it was on, then it was off. It was on, it was off. Yes, no, yes, no. And I just thought my heart was going to absolutely be squeezed dry. I was hope and then despair, hope and despair. And in the midst of all this, by Baba's grace, he arranged for me to learn from somebody some different things in my sadhana, for which I am grateful. But anyway, when I was taught these things, it was utterly natural to me, and I began having some very deep sadhana experiences, and I couldn't open my eyes for 3 and 4 hours at a time, and couldn't move, and Vivek knew something was happening to me, but he didn't know what. Anyway, I was off. This was it. This was it for me, and I just jumped in and dove in, and it was everything for me. And I got back to Australia, and I could do simple service. I couldn't bear any worldly discussion. Yeah. I couldn't stand the sound of a television or a radio. I would move around the property, and there were so many things going on, RDSs and all sorts of stuff, and lots of different dramas, and I couldn't tolerate it at all. Just simple service and sadhana. I couldn't do anything else. And because I couldn't do anything else, it's like Baba was testing me. I'd hear people saying things like, oh, there she goes again. Oh, she might even do some service. Well, that's a surprise. Gaotamii doing something, finally. And things like this. And these were acharyas as well as margis. And it was like a test. It was like I had an invisible raincoat on, and their words just slid off my back like honey. It was sweet. To hear these things was sweet because it just drove me into his arms more and more and more. And I just became more and more locked into this bhav of Baba and I. And I even reached the point where one Dada came and said, oh, Baba came in my dream last night, and it was this and this and this. And he said, and I demanded that he come. That's why he came. So I immediately said, right, you come tonight, Baba. If that Dada can do that, you come, and I'd be very demanding, and I'd just say, I'm not going to eat anything, I'm not going to speak to anybody until I see you come. And lo and behold, he'd come. And it would be very, very intimate and very loving and that sort of thing. So this was going on and going on. And probably from May until October. And as October was approaching, time for Brothers PC was coming. And Vivek said, yes, I'll go for PC. And I said, good, great, you go. Because the less people in my life, the simpler it became, and I could do more sadhana. And I was doing 7-hour sadhana in the morning from 3 a.m. till 10 till 10, and I'd get up and just like a robot, a few sweet words would come out of my mouth, and as I'd let the children go off to school, and they would make their own breakfast, and I'd pretend I was supervising, but really I was just thinking all the time. I'd touch the stove and I'd think, oh, Bhava, and I was in another world completely. And then, so Vivek went off to see Bhava, and he called me from Singapore. And he said, there was only one thing that was kind of holding me back in my sadhana. I felt like, is this right what I'm doing? I need to know this is right what I'm doing, because I knew in some corner of my mind, I'm leaving the world. This is extreme. This is the real deal. This is not pretend anymore. And so Vivek called me from Singapore, and he said, go to me. When I go to see Bhava, what do you want me to say to him from you? And I said, Vivek, this is Vivek's character. Never thinking of himself, always thinking of others. So what do you mean? You're going to be in the room with Bhava. You don't want to talk about me. You go and you be with Bhava. No. What's the thing you want to say to Bhava? And as he said that, we kept sort of quarreling about it a little bit. And the last time he said that, I had the feeling, this is Bhava talking to me. This is my opportunity to. It's like Bhava was drawing out of the depths of my heart, what is the thing that you have in your heart for me? So I started to cry, and I really tried hard not to cry. And I said, Vivek, the only message I have for Bhava is, I'm getting so much bliss out of this, but what does Param Purush get? It's like, the feedback I was getting from the world was, this is selfish sadhana. This type of sadhana is selfish. So I was a bit confused. I was thinking, well, I think I'm doing it for Bhava, but what is it really? Am I being selfish? Or what does Param Purush get out of this? What does he feel? So Vivek said, okay, I'll ask him. Anyway, I hung up, and that was the end of that. I never gave it another thought. I just again dove into this world of Madhu Bhava. And 2 weeks later, I get a phone call in the middle of the night. And it's 9:30 at night. And I was actually asleep. And Vivek said, I got my PC. I said, that's great. That's really, really good. And he said, and I asked your question to Bhava. I said, oh. He said, I got up to leave, and I put my hand on the doorknob of Bhava's door to leave the room. And suddenly it popped in my mind. And he said, I turned around, and Bhava was sitting on his cot with his eyes closed. And I said to Bhava, oh, Bhava, Gautami's really enjoying your sadhana. And Bhava folded his hands and closed his eyes, and he said, but I enjoy so much more. And when he said that, I burst into hysterical laughter, dropped the phone, began crying and howling, rolling on the floor. And Mirabai jumped out of the bed, and she came into me, Mom, are you okay? And she was crying and crying. She had me by the shoulders, and she was saying, oh, Mom, are you all right? Oh, please, Mom. And I just couldn't stop this state that I was in. And I got my question answered, that it didn't matter, that it was like Baba pulled out the last little thing that was holding me back, and it just became a flood after that. And I actually no longer slept in my own bed, because Vivek and I both had separate beds in his bedroom, and I no longer slept in there. I got a sleeping mat, and I slept on the floor in the lounge room in front of the fire, so I could just do sadhana all night and just live in that world. And sometimes I moved from room to room. I wanted the feeling that I'm not tied by anything, that I'm not that I'm just acting the role of a mother and a housewife, but that isn't who I am. Who I am is his devotee and his sannyasi from zillions of lifetimes. But you can understand a little of how my daughter must have felt growing up with this kind of thing going on. But that was like the last dam broke for me after that message from Baba. Another story takes place at Anandanagar. Didi's just told the story of how looking at Baba and just aching and realizing that one half of his heart is in his body, and the other half of the same heart is in her body. And it made me think of this experience. I was at Anandanagar again, May, can't remember what year, maybe 87 or 88, probably 87. And I was sleeping under a different tree each night and doing a lot of manabrat and doing a lot of sadhana and not socializing at all, just there for only spiritual. And every time Baba would give darshan or come out, I'd go for that, and then I'd go disappear up in the hills again. And Didinanda Sampurna said, to all of the Suva sector people, Baba's going to give something, I can't even remember what it was, some meeting or some opportunity to be with him. But it might happen or it might not happen. Anyway, I thought, let me take a chance. I'll go and try to get into this. But I was also feeling really torn because I wanted to be with my internal Anandamurti. And to actually be with him physically requires going into a different drama and so much struggle. And I thought, do I want to come out of my sadhana to actually put myself through that? And then I thought, yes, I do. So I went down and we sat on the curved, half-round veranda of Baba's house. And to me, Baba's house was just like a wedding cake that day. And we were all just sitting and waiting. And we waited for 7 to 8 hours. And there were people just pasted up against the walls with the heat. Even blinking took too much effort, far too much effort. There was water available. I had a huge water source. And I remember that was the day I drank something like 14 liters or 11, 12, 13 liters of water. And I urinated half a teacup. That's how dry and hot the weather was there. Anyway, I was just sitting leaning up against a post, and I let my eyes just glass over for many, many hours, and I just ideated, and I was doing half dhyan the whole time, serving Baba and loving Baba. And I looked across, and very close to the door, right next to the door, the entrance door, was Didinanda Mitra with a very elderly lady. And she looked at me quite meaningfully and just gave a little toss of her head. And I understood by that, come here, Gaotamii. So I did, and I'm moving very slowly. Everything's like being underwater in that kind of weather, let alone waiting for Anandamurti. Oh, Baba. And so I went and sat close to her, right scrunched next to her, and this sister, this elderly woman. And Didi said, it's going to happen soon. When I say the word, you take this lady's other arm and we will pull her in as well. This lady's like my mother. I just nodded and said, yeah, we'll do that. And within a very short time, moments, there was this huge bustling of activity, and everybody snapped to attention, and still the people waiting on the veranda they didn't snap to attention, but they became aware that something was happening, and they sort of adjusted their position a little bit. Anyway, down the outside steps came this flood of workers all chattering away to one another and arguing and carrying on, and a lot of loud noise. It sounded like a flock of birds, very loud birds, flock of galahs, as they say in Australia. And the guard there were two guards at the door with their sticks across the door. The doors swung open. Didi jumped to her feet, grabbed this woman, and she just looked at me and said, "Now, Gaotamii, now." So I jumped to my feet also and grabbed the lady's other arm, and we just began to push against these VSS guards. And they were shouting, "No ladies, no ladies." And I sort of held back for an instant. And Didi looked at me as I thought she was sort of saying, "Come on," you know. And she just said, "Run, run." So she grabbed the sticks and under we went, and we just ran. And it felt like we ran a long way, but we only ran about 3 paces. Then the guards were occupied with shouting, no ladies," to another packed group of people trying to push past them. So we were already in, home and dry. We were safe. And slowly, very, very slowly, we started up this staircase. And as we took each step upwards, something happened to my mind. It just was going more and more, gone. And it felt like by the time I got to the top of the staircase, I was wading through thick honey or molasses, just wading through it. The vibration was so ethereal and so otherworldly, like nothing really I don't think I'd ever experienced, even in my, Baba's experiences are endless, so I didn't experience it before. And we got to the top of the stairs, and Didi stopped and paused to help this lady, and I don't know what happened. I just dropped her arm and started walking. And I walked into Baba's darshan room, and he was on the cot at the end in these lovely bay windows. And there was one Dada who was standing looking out those windows. His back was to us, and he actually didn't interrupt the intimacy between Baba and I, because it was almost like he was just a colored blot on the screen. He wasn't there. And I began to slowly wade through this bliss towards Baba. My hair was all hanging out. My handbag was sort of dragging along in my arm, and I was just walking and walking towards Baba, and it was endless. Baba made time completely, there was no time. He completely dissolved time. And Baba was sitting on his cot like this, playing with a petal on his garland, and just staring at me, just gazing and gazing. And it was like we were drinking from each other, like an oasis, like this huge fulfillment was happening. And I kept walking, but it was forever. It wasn't that I was in one point and I was going to reach another point, or I was walking towards Baba and then I would reach Baba. It was forever. The devotee's walk, whatever body, is forever. That path is endless. There's no culmination. That is the culmination. So it was infinite time that we were just enjoying, and Baba was looking and looking and looking, and his mouth was open, like this anticipation, and yet this fulfillment was happening simultaneously. I have no idea how long it took me to get across that room. No idea whatsoever. Many realizations came about the spiritual path and who he is and who I am, and what devotion is, what the devotee's path is, what love is. And all the time he was playing with this petal, I realized I am that petal on his garland of devotees. In this tiny instant in time and space, he's playing with me. He's enjoying me. And all of his devotees are clustered around his neck, decorating him. That's the purpose of his devotees, just for his pleasure and his decoration and enjoyment. And then, as I got very close to Baba, I heard somewhere dimly behind me, I heard some commotion. And again, I can't describe the quality of the air, and there there was no sound. It was silent and so beautiful. And then came this sound, like the world was coming into being again. And Baba and I had to, the Leela of that Leela, that part of the Leela had to finish, and he was playing with this flower, and he just gave a big sigh. Like, well, it's over for now. I have to go back to the world and do my duty. And I also had to do my duty, which was to be the devotee. So I went down on the floor, and I was so stupid with bliss. It's very embarrassing to say I was so utterly stupid with bliss. I didn't even do pranam. I just sat there still gaping at him. Then Didyananda Amitra just sort of cruised to a halt right beside me and went immediately into pranam. And I realized, oh, Baba, so again I got on my knees and put my face to the floor and got up, and that was a very nice day in my life.